Sometimes a story finds you not in the stars, but in the tides, in the unclaimed corners of our own planet where imagination collides with possibility. I've got an author I'd like you to meet whose book dares to dream of new nations rising on and beneath the sea. A world where cultures are born from saltwater and steel, where boundaries shift with the current and survival depends on invention, alliance, and belief. Stick around because you'll not only learn more about this book, you'll learn about the writing voyage this author took to create it.
Welcome to A Book Finds You podcast. This week's guest is Stephen R Southard. Join us as he shares the inspiration behind his book, along with his writing process, routines, and challenges. And now, here's your host, best-selling author, Rob Jolles.
A past president of the Maryland Writers Association and Naval Academy graduate, Stephen R Southard writes science fiction. At his website, StephenRSouthard.com, where he's known as Poseidon's Scribe, you can learn about his 24 published stories and the 3 anthologies he's edited. Steve just launched his first collection of short stories, The Seastead Chronicles. Happy to have you with us, so welcome to the show, Steve.
Thank you very much, Rob. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So let's dive in. And I want to hear, you know the first question, you're a listener. Let's talk about how that book found you.
Yeah, it found me when I was back perhaps 15 years ago, still writing steampunk and, steampunk type stories. And they were that genre was starting to fade. I was still interested in steampunk and alternate history, but readers weren't. And a friend of mine, a fellow Marylander, I lived in Maryland at the time, fellow writer named Andy Gudgel, sent me an article about seasteads, which are platforms. Think of them as homesteads at sea, right? They're platforms on or under the sea where people could live in the future. And I was intrigued and thought, yeah, I could write a story there. So I did. That led to another and another. And before I kind of knew it, I thought, I've got to combine all these. This is a world. This is a whole book. And so similar to Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, the Seastead Chronicles are all set in the same world, except it's ours. And instead of habitats on Mars, we're talking seasteads, which develop into nations. I call them aqua states at sea. So all the oceans get carved up into nations, and with all the fun and craziness and conflict that provides.
Yeah, you describe distinct seabed economies and these boundaries that you're talking about, and disputes and new religions. So which of these emerged organically from the story, and maybe which were derived from real life movements or technology speculation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that unlike the Martian Chronicles, where Ray Bradbury was trying to talk, his theme was how the Western civilizations tends to pollute everything it touches, right? When it colonizes, it destroys. I chose a different path with the Seastead Chronicles. I viewed it as when people move to a new place, the place changes them. So this evolves. I figured when people moved to the sea at some future time, the sea would change them. They develop new slang terms. They develop new cultures, new music, new art, and even threw in a new religion. So that's kind of what I was going for. It's just, to me, it was the inventive and creative part of humanity when we moved someplace, just like settling of the Old West, right? We developed our own Western culture and so on. So I figured that would happen and might happen if humanity moved to live in the sea.
Yeah, what's interesting about you, Steve, is that, I'm a business author, so I write about, facts or very strong opinions. And then, of course, I interview a lot of fictional authors, and they're into their own world. But you're really interesting to me because you kind of straddle the real and the imaginary. So I'm trying to form a question here. How do you balance that creativity with plausible science and sociology?
Yeah, my training is as an engineer. I graduated with a degree in naval architecture, designing ships and so on. So I guess I come by the sort of fact-based stuff naturally. I don't write fantasy on occasion, but I don't super enjoy it. I'd rather not have magic. I'd rather just kind of, to me, real life is fun enough with science, and so I primarily write a hard science fiction where you have to stick within the bounds of what's possible.
Okay. All right. So you have rules to your
Yeah,
writing. Okay.
yep,
Good.
exactly.
Uh, you told the story of this individual who's sort of talking to you, and and how that book found you. As a follow-up to that, how do you know when you have a conversation like that that the idea is still worth pursuing?
Yeah, to me, it's build on a book finding you. If a story finds you and it won't let you go, if your
Right.
muse starts with a whisper, right, and your muse
Right.
then, kind of strongly worded, and then pretty much shouting at you, get the darn thing written, and you mull it over, and you find yourself thinking about it when you're mowing the lawn or taking a shower, and you say, "All right, it's not letting me go." And no one else is going to write this. At least no one will write it the way I do. So I've got to set it down. So,
Right.
and how do you know it'll succeed? I wish, I don't know that any writer knows that. It'd be great if we could, because we'd all write what would work in the marketplace. But you just, if you don't have the passion for the story, then you probably won't finish it, even if you do start it.
Right. And if I snuck in the words, how do you know it'll succeed? Then I would like to retract those words because those
Oh,
aren't mine.
yeah, I,
When a book grabs you, it grabs you. When it wakes you up at night, it wakes you up at night. Success is a whole nother piece. I just wrote a short story about, I call the fisherman's bucket, about, walking up to a fisherman with a closed bucket and saying, "Did you catch anything?" And realizing I'd already put my foot in my mouth, because that's not why the fisherman's out there. I mean, yes, maybe, maybe not, but they already know you're not a fisherman. I'm out
right,
there for the joy of standing on the Potomac River on a beautiful day. And that's
right,
us writers, right?
right. So
Right.
true.
Right. So success would be lovely too. And yeah, okay, let's have a bestseller. But the real journey is writing the book and crossing the finish line with it and achieving that goal. That's the victory.
Yeah, yeah. Not everybody can say that. Not, a lot of people start books and don't finish them. A lot of people say, I'd like to write this, or I'll someday write that. The old saying that writing a novel is a one day event, as in one day I'll write a novel. So, uh,
Yeah, yeah. I've got to start giving it out to all the authors who are on the show as sort of a thank you. But I have somewhere buried this little. It's not really a poem, but it's basically this decree that says, "Thinking about writing is not writing. Planning to write is not writing. Researching to write is not writing," and a few more, Steve. And ends with, "Writing is writing."
yeah,
And
yep,
that's the bottom line. We do all the other things, but ultimately we just have to pick up the shovel, head to that area of the yard and start digging.
right. That's right. There's no substitute for it.
No, no. When you start writing, do you begin with the end in mind, or do you know where it's going, or do you let it sort of take you there, or maybe a combination?
Yeah, I am a planner from
Right,
beginning to end. I outline thoroughly. It's just my way. I'm not sure, you know, they call them pantsers or
right,
discovery writers. I've never even tried that. It would, to me, it scares me in the sense that the rewriting, which I don't like anyway, would be absolutely horrendous, because the thing would end up in such a different way at the end than I'd imagined at the beginning, that I'd have to change way too much.
right.
So outlining is the way for me.
Yeah,
Um, I use a thing that, for your listeners who might be writers, they might want to look this up, the snowflake method. It's a great method. If you think about, a snowflake starting with simple thing like a triangle, and then triangles from the triangle, and then so on and so on, and you end up with a beautiful shape, even though it starts simply. That's kind of what the snowflake method is. It starts with a simple declarative sentence. What's my story about? And then you kind of build from there slowly, slowly, and let it emerge. And then you got an outline. And to me, after you've got a complete outline, the writing itself is pretty easy.
yeah. Spoken like a true engineer, by the way. I'm
Right.
smiling over here going, huh, that guy sounds like an engineer.
Right. Got to have a process. Right.
But I'm not an engineer, and I think that it's sort of like those personalities. You're analytical, social, you're dominant. We're not all of anything. We may lean one way. You're certainly leaning that way. I lean there with you. I like creating an outline for my own sanity to know that I know where this is going. I'm not going to sit there, put my hands on the keyboard and go, now what? But I also enjoy the moments where, because I'm so embedded in the story, it begins to take me in slightly different direction or add to it, or things start popping. So there's a little bit of a combination there.
Yeah, open to that too. That has, of course, happened, right? You write
Yeah.
this outline, and then you get into the story, and the character is basically telling you, that's not going to work. I'm rebelling. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, okay, wait. I did something wrong. And so you have to, modify your outline a bit.
Right.
So, yes, I've done that. Yeah, you got to be open to that sort of
Good.
thing.
I
Yeah,
can almost feel the engineer in you twitching just a little bit as it's happening, but see, you're
right.
growing, Steve. You're growing. That's good.
That's right. Yep.
Let's talk about your routine a little bit. Do you have a daily routine? Something tells me you do, but let me hear about your routine.
I do, but I'd almost rather not. I started writing with the idea that I'm just going to have to catch snatches of time. When I was during my working years before I retired, I didn't know when I'd have the time. So I wanted to be prepared and mentally ready to write wherever and whenever I was.
Right.
And so I've tried to maintain that. But now in retirement, I found I've settled into things, right? And so I get up in the morning. It's a kind of a 5 o'clock thing for me because I used to wake up at 4:30 when I was working, but I'm sleeping
Now
in
you're
now that I'm
sleeping late.
retired,
Yeah.
all the way till 5. And so I write for a few hours and then I write again in the evening. So daytime is kind of when I can get household chores done and other things, but see the grandkids and so on.
Yeah.
Um, but life unfortunately gets in the way of writing. If it
Right.
wish it weren't true, but it is. And so, yeah, and the other wacky thing, everybody has a wacky routine, and I'll tell you mine. I use what's called I think it's called not Pareto, Pomodoro method. And Pomodoro is Italian for tomato, I think, because the guy used a tomato egg timer, um, tomato shaped thing. And what it does is he says you can really focus for about 25 minutes, and then you need a 5 minute break. And then you can focus for 25 more. So I just set a timer for 25 minutes and I cheat on the 5 minute break. I get down on the floor and do a few push ups, and that's enough to clear my mind and refresh myself so I can get back and hit the timer for 25 minutes. So I try to observe that pretty strictly just because, you tend to get a little stale if you sit the butt in the chair way too long. And, so it's good to re energize with a few push ups.
Smart. With some people, I know people that will, yours is actually good physically. I know for me, I was going to say some people, but how about me? Uh, I'll occasionally, and I really limit this, but I'll go to a very quick solitaire on the computer. And I mean, you get one and you don't get it until you're done with this page, but it'll be one. And those are my push-ups kind of just to,
Yeah,
it's a treat, you know?
right, right. Give the brain a break, and and a lot of times you can then get back to the work refreshed and ready to charge.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I'm a little different than you also, and I'm still waiting to meet more people like me. I'm hearing a lot more like you. I was a marathon runner, and so I was used to running a lot, but I didn't I had a weekly total of miles that I would run. And sometimes I could do it in 5 days, and sometimes I could do it in 3 days. But I was more determined to get the mileage in than figure out each day going a certain number. And I write that way. I'll give myself a word count. And if I'm hot in the beginning of the week, great. I usually keep going because I like to put some words in the bank, so to speak, for next week. But that's the way I am. So my days are fluid, but I know what the week looks like.
yeah, I used to do word counting too. A lot of authors do it. I think to me, it was good in the beginning because it established the habit. It ingrained
Mhm.
it in my mind that, with the day ending in Y, so you're going to write. And
Yeah.
so that was, to me, the point of the word count thing was just kind of to establish the habit. Once the habit was established, I didn't see a need to, to count words. The
Right.
story is a flow, and I have, first drafts to get done. I have editing of other things to get done.
Yep.
So you do what needs doing. And, you know,
Yep.
the word count, everybody's different. It's like you can't really give advice on writing. But all
Right.
you can tell people is do what works for you. And this so far has worked for me. But on the other hand, I'm certainly willing to change and try new habits if I find more success there. I'm willing to
Well,
experiment.
yeah, I think as a guy who's heard a lot of habits, you've got some really good habits. And one of the best habits you have is that you're open for new habits. So
Right.
really I call it a little bit OCD-ish. They get really stuck. And as long as you're open, I think usually your mind and your body will figure out what it is. I described to you what fits for me, and I really think it was just born from a person who was very disciplined runner. And so to me, I felt like I was running a marathon when I started or training for one. But
Right.
that works for me. Everybody's a little different.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about your publishing path a little bit. All right. Because you've got some other works out there too. So tell me about how you go about the publishing part of all this.
Yeah. Um, like a lot of writers, I dreamed of writing a novel. That was the first thing I tackled. And it's what I call a trunk novel. I keep it in the trunk because it's certainly not worth anybody looking at. But it taught me something about writing. And so for that, I'm, happy. And then I shifted to short stories and started to find some success in the sense of publishers publish my stuff. So many of my steampunk and alternate history works are out there, and they didn't do super well in the marketplace, but they're there. I've done about 2 dozen short stories that have been published in various anthologies. That's been my path, is to send stories, to anthologies. And sometimes when they put out a call for submissions, if the idea of the anthology intrigues me, I'd write a story and so on. In fact, that led to a few years ago, I noted that my favorite author, Jules Verne, we were coming up on the 150th anniversary of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And I thought somebody ought to write or do an anthology of new stories based on 20,000 Leagues. So I suggested it to a writer friend of mine who's a publisher. And I said, yeah, if you do that anthology, I'll write a story for it. She says, oh, no, no, no. I'm not qualified to do that. If we're doing this, we're doing it together, you as an editor. I said, I've never edited an anthology. I'm a writer. She says, well, it's that or it doesn't happen. And it's like, oh, man. So we did it, and 20,000 Leagues Remembered came out on the exact 150th anniversary of 20,000 Leagues. So that was fun. I've edited 2 anthologies since then. So I've done a little bit of editing, and now I've shifted to the seasteading world. I'm
Right.
working on a few novels that will continue the series. So it's going to be a series. That's at least the hope right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of been the publishing history.
Yeah. Uh, you mentioned something that the book is, you know, it, sometimes you want it to do better. We want it to do better. The good news is, I wrote my first book in '93. You really did have about a 4-week window to hit. I mean, they were pretty insistent about that. So every author wanted to come out right before Thanksgiving because that's when books sell, when they
Right,
used to sell. I mean, people would go to the bookstore and get the holiday birth or whatever it
right.
is book. But
Yep.
now it really is back to that marathon word again. A book can get hot 5 years after it comes out, and that's why, I applaud you for being on the show. I applaud people that realize that part of the journey is writing it, but we can't get exhausted just because we've taken it across the finish line. It's time to hand the baton off and run the race again, and that's the marketing race. Is there a particular marketing strategy you have? Or something that's worked for you? Somebody's listening right now and maybe sitting with a book that's been a little bit slower than they want. Maybe a tip you could provide?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I do. People can make
I'm
if
going
they
to
can
call it a
run with
tip,
it.
Steve. Don't worry.
Yeah, if they
Go
can get if they
ahead.
can get more success than me, great. But all I can do is tell you what I do,
Yeah.
and I've been blogging for, I've had a website and been blogging for, let's see, about 14 years now. I blog once a week. And so I keep steady discipline of that. It's the blog is mainly intended to help beginning writers. So I write about writing, and occasionally I interview authors as well. So I've had about 70 author interviews. I expose
Mm,
my readers to other authors as well. And so I do that. I've run some Amazon ads. I haven't found that super successful, but then again, it doesn't cost a lot. It's just, I think one of those you have to plod along and keep plugging and, and sort of hope for the best. And now with Seastead Chronicles, I'm trying to find, great podcasts like this one and another podcast that I've signed up for. I'm trying to look into book signings. Don't know how successful they'll be. I see a lot of authors. They look kind of lonely sitting in grocery stores and places, but who knows? You never know. We had an author in my state who was at a grocery store and not selling anything. And a guy walks up to him and says, and asks him about the book. He tells him, and he says, "Hey," he says, "I'm on TikTok. You want to do a TikTok thing?" So they right there in the store did a TikTok video, and that went viral. There he found his audience. His audience was on TikTok, not at the grocery store. So that was a serendipitous kind of thing that can happen, right? You
right.
just never know. So those are some of the things I'm trying. And I go to cons when I can, conventions, the sci-fi conventions.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but you know, so you just sort of do what you can to get your name out and hope for the best. I don't know that I used to believe that there's no substitute for good writing, and I still believe that's the right thing you have to start with. You have to have a good book or books. But being a bit of a promoter, being a bit of a marketer is also valuable these days. So,
Yeah. Well, first of all, congratulations on that blog. I'm a blogger myself, and I've been at it longer than you, but I don't have as many as you because I've been at it 16 years, but I went once a week for the first couple of years, and then my writing started to go down a little bit because I was really just shoving topics forward. I wasn't interviewing people like you are, and
right,
I found a rhythm of every other week. And away we go. But to me, it's like a boxer getting in there and just getting some ring work in. We got to get in and get the gloves up and keep putting words together. And so I like it because not every day are we working on a new book. So
right,
blogs are
true,
great for that. And one other thing, just as a guy who's done a few book signings, for anybody who's listening, and unless you're Grisham, I don't think we're going to have lines around the block here. But I'll tell you what, every book, one way, a nice technique to market a book is something that you can give away with the book at a signing. So I had a book, for instance, that dealt with being a road warrior, and I made for about $1 a piece these little travel bags that would sort of snap together, and they were about the size of a baseball. And I remember signing with another author at a Barnes and Noble, and I'm not telling you my book was any better than his, but my line was fairly long because they got a bag with the
yep,
book.
they got a freebie.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
oh,
Yeah, I have had back when I was doing steampunk stuff, would have a friend of mine make the 3D printed models of some of the gadgets and vehicles and crazy stuff that I had in my stories. And so those make nice, not giveaway things, but something to display, so that when you go to a con or go to a signing, you've got stuff other than books. And people pick them up and ask about them and stuff like that. I guess if people said, "Hey, how much would you want?" I might
right.
sell the things, but and I'm thinking of for the Seastead Chronicles, I'm thinking of some, I guess you call them reader magnets. If people would be interested in, say, the I mean, I've got a whole map of what the oceans look like when they're carved up into these nations, and that might be of interest people. So it's not ready to give away yet, but that's one of the things I'm thinking about, doing. So, got some thoughts. I think that's great what you did, and I'm going to have to take that one aboard too. Maybe look for low cost, free stuff that
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
could.
For me, that's always, and one of the things to keep an eye on is to make sure it travels well. So, in other words, like a mug, well, they're a little bit more expensive, but how many can you really get in a bag? pins,
Bookmarks, pens,
things
yeah.
like that. And the more enjoyable, almost the sillier, the more creative, the better. That's always worked well for me, and you can really get them in it fairly inexpensively. Even these little wooden nickels. I'm thinking about your book right now, and I'm thinking you could probably get these little wooden nickels with maybe different um, I don't want to call them towns, but civilizations or
Seasons.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe
Mhm.
people can collect them a little bit or something, but you can get those for less than 10 cents a piece. And have a little bag of that. And, your story about TikTok, we're going to start bringing our episode in, but that's a very important story you told. And I'll tell you why, in my opinion, because we have to just keep exploring and trying because we never know when we'll fall into something like that. If he doesn't go to the signing and he doesn't sit there with one person in 20 minutes to sign a book for her, to answer a question and think, scratching his head, going, why am I here? Well, you're here because it's a low percentage move. But if we do a lot of low percentage moves, I'm not sure he was lucky. I think he put himself in a position to be lucky if he per se. So I applaud moves like that. And let's not worry if they hit home runs every time. Let's just keep getting up and swinging.
Right, right, right. That old saying of the harder I work, the luckier I seem to get is really, really true.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I
And I
agree.
think that's the lesson he learned too, from what I remember of his, his blogs and his talks about it. He said it was his persistence and just being in the right kind of place. It wasn't so much that he miscalculated and didn't know where his audience was. It was that circumstances happened and a person introduced him to where his audience was. So,
Yep. Yep. I even I know people who are working on books, but who's to say we can't do this when we've completed a book to just make one pin for yourself that says, ask me about my book,
yeah,
with something very creative on there. And you'd be surprised what that might do in a CVS line, in a Safeway line, something. Let's just keep talking. Let's keep talking to people. Let them know. Because I've probably been behind you in a Safeway line. I didn't know you had a book. Now I
right,
do.
right,
So let's keep,
exactly.
every idea is a good idea. All right, last question for you. We've got some aspiring writers that tend to listen to the show, and I always like to kind of finish with something that we can maybe encourage them with. So if you were to talk to an aspiring writer right now who's thinking about it, but kind of a little nervous about the size and scope of this project, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I'm always reminded of Ray Bradbury wrote a book called Zen and the Art of Writing, and he quoted in there. He remembered reading a an Irish newspaper where they arrested a guy for being, as they put it, drunk and in charge of a bicycle. And the wording was kind of funny, but he thought about that and he said, "Wait a minute, that's that's what I do, right? That's writing for me. I am drunk and in charge of a bicycle. I don't know where it's going. I'm as, who knows? I'm wobbling, I'm veering. Who knows where the bike is going to go next? But I am drunk on it. I love this, right? And so writing with passion, there's something about that. Just go headlong into it, and see where it leads you. And write from the heart, from your passion, whatever you care most about, write it down because readers are pretty good truth detectors. And if you're writing about human truths, the human condition, people sense that. People like that.
Yeah,
So that'd be my best advice.
that's
Be drunk
super.
and in charge of a bicycle.
That's so super that you might see a blog called "Drunken in Charge of a Bicycle" from Jollis in a couple of
There,
weeks. We'll see.
there you go.
I'm gonna.
There you
I'm,
go.
one of us has got to write it, either you or
Yeah,
me, but we'll
I,
decide.
I may already have, but you could certainly link to mine.
All right. Well, speaking of which, how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best way is just to go to my website, Stephen R. Southard, Stephen with a V, and then R and Southard spelled SOUTHARD.com. I'm known on the website as Poseidon's Scribe, so don't be put off by that. It's still me. And it's got contact stuff there on X and Facebook as well. I think my emails may be in there too. So yeah, that's
Perfect. Perfect. And there are no dots in there or anything, everybody. It's just One word, Stephen R. Southard. Well, Stephen R. Southard, been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'm still stuck on this drunk and in charge of a bicycle, so thanks for that.
You bet.
But really, a pleasure talking to you. I just love the interview, and I'm grateful we had time to put it together. Thanks for being on the show.
I am too. It's been a pleasure for me, Rob. Appreciate it.
You bet. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time, everybody. Until then, stay safe.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's guest author, we'd love you to rate, review, and share this episode with others. If you'd like more information on today's guest or the Maryland Writers Association, please visit our website at marylandwriters.org. You can also hear a brief history of the Maryland Writers Association by listening to episode 0.